All right, let's dive into the world of the white-tailed deer. I bet everyone listening thinks they know this animal.
Oh, yeah, iconic creature, right.
But we're going to dig into some research here that shows some surprising stuff about them. You know, their adaptability, their role in the ecosystem.
And their sometimes complicated relationship with us humans.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, so we always see those classic images, right, of white-tailed deer, peaceful in the forest. But this research mentions them thriving in all sorts of places you wouldn't expect.
Right.
So what's the deal with that?
Well, their range is huge. I mean,
Yeah.
think about it. From the forests up in Canada all the way down to the plains in the Midwest and even,
Oh, wow.
yeah, even suburban neighborhoods.
So, like, they're not just hanging out in, like, nature preserves or national
They're
parks.
just adaptable.
Out in the burbs.
Yeah.
Wow. So what's the key to that? Like, how are they so successful in all these different types of places?
They're generalists. Unlike some animals that are super picky about their food or where they live, white-tailed deer can make do with a lot of different options.
Okay.
That flexibility is what lets them thrive in places other animals wouldn't.
So they're not picky eaters?
Nope, not at all. Their diet is super diverse. Grasses, leaves, acorns, even fruit.
Pull up fruit?
Oh, yeah, and crops, too. Which can obviously cause some issues with us humans, particularly farmers.
Yeah, you can imagine a farmer not being too thrilled about a bunch of deer munching on their crops. So this diet must be, like, really connected to their digestive system, right? The research mentioned the ruminants, something about a four-chambered stomach.
Right.
What is that all about?
It's amazing, really. That four-chambered stomach is like a super efficient system for breaking down tough plant material.
Mm.
Like they have a built-in fermentation system, so they get the absolute most nutrients from every plant they eat.
Ah, that's incredible. Okay, so we've talked about how adaptable they are. But what about their physical features? Like, what makes a white-tailed deer stand out?
Well, the most obvious one is right there in the name, the white tail.
Right.
And it's not just for show. When they're startled, up goes that tail like a bright white flag. It's a warning to other deer in the area.
Oh, that's interesting. So it's like their own personal lookout sign. I like that. Okay, and speaking of physical features, the males, the bucks, they've got those big antlers.
Yeah.
Those don't seem very practical for everyday life.
You're not wrong. Those antlers aren't really for like moving through the woods or anything. Their main purpose is all about competition and attraction.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, during the rut, that's mating season for them.
Oh,
Bucks use their antlers to fight each other. It's all about dominance.
oh wow.
And the bigger and more impressive the antlers are, the better the chances of attracting a mate.
So it's strength and style points.
Exactly.
Like nature's fashion show, but with some real consequences.
Right.
Okay, now I've always kind of assumed white-tailed deer were all roughly the same size,
Oh, no.
but I guess that's not true.
Oh, not at all. Depending on where they live and how much food is available, their weight can be anywhere from 100 pounds to over 300 pounds.
Wow, that's like saying a human can be the size of a teenager or a sumo wrestler.
Exactly.
That's a huge difference.
It is.
So what causes that much variation?
It all comes down to the environment.
Makes sense.
A deer living in a place with tons of food and mild winters is going to be a lot bigger than one that's struggling to survive in a harsh environment.
So it's not just genes. It's also about where they live and what they have access to.
Precisely.
Okay, so it's like location, location, location.
Yeah, and that brings us to their preference for transitional zones.
Transitional zones, what are those?
Think of like the edge of a forest where it meets a meadow or a field.
Okay,
That's a transitional zone. Those areas give deer the best of both worlds.
cool, I see.
They can find cover and protection in the woods, but they also have easy access to open areas for foraging.
So it's about maximizing their chances of survival, having their safe haven, but also having their open buffet right there.
Exactly.
So they're not just adaptable in what they eat, but also where they live.
Absolutely.
They're really good at making the most of their surroundings.
They are, and that resourcefulness extends to their behavior too, especially when it comes to avoiding predators.
Oh, right. The research mentioned something about them being crepuscular. Is that like a twilight thing?
You got it. Crepuscular animals are most active at dawn and dusk.
Okay.
For deer, it's strategic. Avoid the heat of the day, less likely to run into humans.
Yeah.
And most importantly, it lines up with when a lot of their predators are out and about.
Oh, so it's all about timing.
It is.
Like they're playing hide and seek with danger.
That's a great way to put it.
And to win that game, they must have incredible senses.
They do.
Always on alert.
Their sense of smell is particularly impressive. They can pick up on the faintest odors, find food, potential mates, and, of course, sense danger from a long way off.
It's like having a built-in early warning system. Wow. And what about their hearing? I've always noticed those big ears.
Those ears are super sensitive. They can swivel independently too, so they can pinpoint exactly where a sound is coming from.
So they're not just hearing, they're actively listening, gathering intel.
Right.
And what about their vision?
It might not be as dominant as smell or hearing, but it's still well suited for their lifestyle. Their eyes are on the sides of their heads, so they have a wide field of view. Really important for spotting movement.
Makes sense considering they're always on the lookout for danger. And I remember reading that they can see pretty well in low light.
They can. Their eyes have lots of rod cells. Those are specialized for seeing in dim conditions.
Oh, so that's how they're able to be so active at dawn and dusk,
Exactly.
when it's not quite dark, but not quite light either.
Right.
So their senses are really fine-tuned for their lifestyle.
They are.
It's a great example of how evolution works,
It is.
shaping their abilities over thousands of years
Yeah.
to give them the best chance of survival.
Exactly.
Their senses are like a symphony of evolution.
It's a symphony of evolution.
I like that. Okay, so they can sense danger, but what about actually avoiding predators? What are their physical adaptations for that?
Well, they're incredibly fast and agile, for one thing. They can hit speeds of up to 30 miles per hour, and they can maneuver through thick brush and over obstacles with no problem.
Yeah, I've seen them bounding through the woods. It's like they're flying.
It is pretty impressive.
And their hooves are perfectly designed for that kind of movement.
They are.
2 toes, great traction, perfect for quick turns. They can totally outmaneuver a predator.
Right.
So it's not just about speed, it's about agility and precision. They're like athletes of the forest.
Great analogy.
I try. And their coats, too. Especially for fawns, the spots.
Yeah, the spots act as camouflage, help them blend into the forest floor, makes them really hard to see.
So it's not just about being fast, it's about being invisible, too.
Right.
It's like a whole multifaceted approach to survival.
Exactly.
So they've evolved all these different ways to avoid being someone's dinner.
They have, and they're really good at it.
Okay, so we've talked about their senses, we've talked about how they avoid being eaten, but what about finding food and interacting with each other?
Yeah.
What can you tell us about their foraging and their social lives?
Well, their foraging is another great example of how adaptable they are. As we said before, they're not picky eaters.
Yeah.
They're what we call opportunistic browsers, meaning they'll eat whatever's available, whether it's grass, shrubs, leaves, acorns, you name it.
So they're constantly adjusting their menu
They are.
based on what nature's providing.
Exactly.
And what about their social structure? Are they loners or do they live in groups?
It depends on a lot of factors. Habitat, time of year, how many deer are in the area. But generally speaking, they're matriarchal, meaning the females, the does, are the ones who run the show.
Oh, interesting. So it's the girls who are in charge.
Pretty much. Does typically form small family groups themselves. They're fawns from that year and sometimes offspring from previous years.
Oh, wow.
These groups offer protection, support, and they share knowledge about where to find food.
Makes sense. Strength in numbers. And what about the bucks? Where do they fit in?
Bucks tend to be more solitary, especially outside of breeding season.
Right.
They might hang out with other bucks sometimes, but their main focus is on establishing and defending their territory.
So it's all about competition,
It is.
especially during the rut.
Yeah, during the rut, their behavior changes completely. They get really vocal, lots of grunting and snorting,
Yeah.
and they use those antlers to fight each other.
So it's all about showing off their strength
Yeah.
and trying to win over the females.
Exactly.
Sounds intense.
It can be.
And once the breeding season's over,
The bucks usually go back to their solitary lives. They need to rest and recover after all that.
so it's like a cycle. Intense competition followed by a period of peace and quiet.
Exactly.
It's fascinating how their behavior is so connected to the seasons,
It is.
to the need to reproduce. Well, this has been an incredible start to our deep dive. We've learned so much already about their adaptability, their senses, their physical abilities, and their social lives. It's clear there's a lot more to these animals than meets the eye. We'll be back shortly to delve even deeper into the world of the white-tailed deer. Stay tuned.
Welcome back. So before the break, we were talking about the historical significance of white-tailed deer, especially their importance to indigenous cultures.
Right. It's really interesting to think about how connected their lives were with the people who lived alongside them for centuries. It's a perspective that we don't always think about today.
Yeah, it's easy to forget that our relationship with these animals goes back so far. For indigenous people, deer weren't just a resource. They were a vital part of their culture, their spirituality, their whole way of life.
So it was a much deeper connection than just hunting for food.
Absolutely. Every part of the deer was used. The meat, the hide, the bones, the antlers. They were a source of food, clothing, tools, even ceremonial objects.
It really makes you realize how closely humans and nature used to be.
It does.
These animals weren't just something to observe. They were woven into the fabric of people's lives.
Exactly. And understanding that historical context is crucial for appreciating how complex our relationship with deer is today.
Right, because even though our lifestyles have changed so much, deer haven't disappeared.
Mm.
They're still here, even in places that are becoming more and more urban.
That's true.
So how has that shift impacted our relationship with them?
It's created a really interesting mix of interactions. There's still a strong tradition of hunting, especially in rural areas,
Right.
but their presence in suburban and even urban areas has brought up some new challenges.
And some new opportunities too, I guess.
Yeah, definitely.
But you're talking about those conflicts we mentioned earlier, right?
Yeah.
Like deer getting into gardens and causing car accidents.
Those are certainly part of it.
Yeah.
But there's also a growing appreciation for having them around, even in places where they might be considered a nuisance.
I can see that.
People enjoy watching them, taking pictures of them, even just seeing a deer in their backyard can bring them joy.
So it's kind of a mixed bag.
It is.
We're trying to figure out how to live alongside them in these human-dominated landscapes. But we're also rediscovering how much they add to our lives. It's all about finding that balance.
It is, and that balance requires understanding.
Understanding their behavior, their needs, and their role in the ecosystem.
Right.
Okay, so let's shift gears a little bit here and talk more about those amazing senses that deer have. We know they're super alert, always paying attention to their surroundings.
Yeah.
But what exactly makes their senses so sharp?
Well, their sense of smell is incredible. It's way more sensitive and complex than ours.
I bet.
They can detect the tiniest odors carried on the wind. So they can find food, identify potential mates, and most importantly, sense danger from far away.
It's like they have a built-in early warning system.
Exactly.
And their hearing, too. Those big ears.
Those ears are incredibly sensitive. They can pick up sounds that we would never even notice. They can swivel independently.
Really?
Yeah, so they can pinpoint exactly where a sound is coming from.
So they're not just hearing. They're actively listening,
They are.
gathering information.
Exactly.
What about their vision?
Their vision isn't as strong as their sense of smell or hearing, but it's still well adapted for their crepuscular lifestyle. Remember, they're most active at dawn and dusk.
Right.
So their eyes are positioned on the sides of their heads, which gives them a wide field of view.
Makes sense. Gotta be able to see danger coming from any direction.
Right, and they also have great night vision. Their eyes have a high concentration of rod cells, which are specialized for seeing in low light.
So they can see really well even when it's getting dark.
Exact.
It's amazing how all of their senses work together.
It is.
It's like a perfect system for survival.
It is a perfect system.
But their survival strategies go beyond just sensing danger. They also have all those physical adaptations we talked about earlier. The speed, the agility.
Right.
So what else can you tell us about those physical adaptations?
Well, their speed and agility are really remarkable. They can reach speeds of up to 30 miles per hour, and they can move through dense undergrowth and over obstacles with incredible grace.
Yeah, I've seen them bounding through the woods. It's almost like they're floating.
It's pretty impressive.
And their hooves are perfectly adapted for that kind of movement.
They are.
Split into two toes. Provides great traction and stability.
Exactly.
So they can make those quick turns and changes in direction that help them escape predators.
Right.
So it's not just about speed, it's about agility and precision too.
It is.
They're like athletes of the forest.
I like that analogy.
And their coats too.
Yeah, especially for fawns. Those white spots help them blend into the dappled sunlight on the forest floor. Makes them really hard for predators to see.
So it's like they have multiple layers of protection.
They do.
Speed, agility, and camouflage.
That's a combination that's allowed them to survive for millions of years.
It's really remarkable. Okay, so we've talked about how they sense danger and how they avoid predators. But what about their foraging habits and how they interact with each other in their social groups?
Their foraging behavior is a great example of their adaptability. As we discussed earlier, they're not picky eaters.
Right.
They'll eat a wide variety of plants depending on what's available and the season.
So they're flexible.
Very flexible.
They make the most of what's around them.
Exactly.
And what about their social structure?
They're generally considered to be matriarchal.
Meaning?
The females, the does, are the ones who lead the